There are plans for a Puss in Boots film since 2004 when Puss in Boots became popular after Shrek 2's release. It was initially going to be a direct-to-DVD film that was released in 2008, but in 2006 it turned into a theatrical release because they saw more marketability. Take it in at 2004 to 2005, Shrek the Third and Shrek Forever After were put into production at the same time, so they were working on 3 films within the entire franchise at the exact same time. Guillermo del Toro was put on the film as an executive producer at September of 2010 as he influenced things like Humpty Dumpty's design, rewriting the ending, designing the fantasy elements regarding the setting, and the architecture of the film, which was influenced by Mexican and Spanish towns. Puss in Boots is the first DreamWorks film that was partially worked on in India as an attachment to Bangalore studio owned by Technicolor. This was done so DreamWorks can gain financial benefits of outsourcing. This was a part of the reason why DreamWorks was able to produce 3 films a year within the last few years at this point. The film starts with Puss in Boots being an outlaw, where he returns to some bar to be subjected to some pretty clever cat jokes. Everyone soon realizes that he is the wanted cat, but he scares them into giving him a score, so they tell him about the murderous Jack, Jill, and their magic beans, as well as the golden goose. Puss mentions something about repaying an old debt, which is the background for his motivation throughout the entire film. While he is about to start the heist, another cat named Kitty Softpaws gets in the way, and they cause Jack and Jill to scare them out of the hotel room. A chase between the 2 cats of course takes place, and somehow leads to a dance fight at a cat club. The cat dance scene is pretty hilarious, and I wish DreamWorks did humor like this more often and had it come off as organic. Things get a bit physical, but he soon realizes that she's a girl, causing him to stop in his tracks. As he goes after Softpaws, he ends up being reintroduced to Humpty Dumpty, and we learn a lot. Him and Kitty Softpaws are working together, and he was close to Puss in Boots a long time ago, to the point where they called one another brothers. They split up 7 years ago after Humpty betrayed Puss on some sort of bridge, and Humpty ends up falling over a bridge. Humpty of course propositions that Puss joins them on the heist for some beans. When he rejects, Kitty goes after him and manages to allure him into working with them. We get even more backstory about the two, which Kitty really didn't ask or care to know. And Puss rambles on and on about how he landed in an orphanage at San Ricardo, and the two ended up being outsiders who stood up for one another. We learn about how Puss got his boots, how he created his cat face, how they bonded over magical beans, so on and so forth. Puss became more heroic, and Humpty became more villainous, as Puss loved the town more and more, and Humpty hated it more and more. Humpty tricked him into aiding and abetting in a heist of San Ricardo, causing the people to be mad at him. Puss ultimately abandons Humpty at a bridge, and after Kitty is forced to wake up, Humpty approaches him to apologize to him, and we move on from the extremely long first act. Act 2 finally starts with the 3 of them attempting a heist as Jack and Jill make it through some sort of canyon. The 2 cats make their way into the carriage, as he wonders why she is not using her claws, as the sword she's using is making it take longer than necessary. It is revealed by her that she does not have any claws. Her soft paws manages to snack the beans, but the pig of Jack and Jill start to make noise, and they catch the cats. Of course there's a small chase, and they of course end up escaping. Puss and Kitty Softpaws start to slowly bond over her story about being clawed by the couple who took her in. I do like the deeper metaphor, which is not shoved in our faces as it usually is with DreamWorks films. They finally find the spot to plant the magic beans. The beanstalk ends up growing really nicely, they end up playing with some clowns, and of course chemistry grows between the kitties. They make it to the castle, and they have to get past the goose who looks after the golden egg. When they finally get there, they not only see one egg, but several eggs, and a small goose is laying all of the golden eggs. Humpty Dumpty tells them that they need to take the goose, since it's a golden dumpster or whatnot, and the other eggs are way too heavy. All of them end up falling in the river and end up out of the tower. When they finally make it back to Earth, All three of them are celebrating with one another, but you see that there's a lot going on. During this dance sequence, Puss and Kitty are starting to fall for one another in quite an adult manner. And when I mean adult, I mean like old DreamWorks adult. And Humpty ends up stealing her during the sequence several times to tell her not to fall for his charms and to stay focused. She tells Puss in Boots that he needs to leave before going to bed, while Puss finally admits to Humpty that it's nice to have his friend back. Of course, this is the moment where he's kidnapped by Jack and Jill and everything goes wrong. Puss wakes up the next morning and ends up in their old town of San Ricardo, where he sees Humpty Dumpty celebrating with Jack and Jill. Humpty Dumpty ends up revealing to him that it was never about the golden eggs, but it was about revenge, since Puss left him on the bridge all of those years back. They of course argue about who stepped who in the bag and who was wrong, whoop-de-whoop-de-woo, and while Puss is arrested in front of his adoptive mother and the entire town, Humpty ends up looking like a hero since he gives the town the golden goose so they can all attain some sort of wealth. Act 3 starts with Puss being in prison, saddened about being betrayed and being seen as an outlaw criminal of San Ricardo. The old man in the cell ends up telling Puss about how Humpty Dumpty stole his beans, since all he cared about was revenge. It is revealed that he is Jack from Jack and the Beanstalk, and he further elaborates that he wanted to steal the goose as a part of revenge. But the main issue is that the goose's mother will destruct anything that messes with her child, so San Ricardo is in danger. Kitty Soft Paws ends up breaking him out of jail, and they have some sort of reconciliation, since she owed him for saving her and felt really bad. Puss ends up confronting Humpty Dumpty, who is just looking at their childhood picture in fondness, but Humpty is trying to leave, so he won't be around when San Ricardo is attacked by the mama goose. Puss doesn't get why Humpty wants San Ricardo to suffer, only for the egg to lash out that he never belonged in the town, and Puss chose the town over him. All of that baggage is over and done with, and Puss convinces Humpty that he's better than this, so they need to return the golden goose to its mother. Humpty and Puss cause the mother goose to chase their daughter, who's on a carriage, while the guards as well as Jack and Jill start to chase them. They end up on the same bridge that caused their fall all of those years ago, and the bridge starts to break as the goose and Humpty are hanging off by a thread rope. Humpty lets go of his rope and ends up becoming some sort of golden egg, who is taken by the gooses to heaven. The film ends with Kitty and Puss dancing through chaos and havoc, which leads to them kissing back at the cat club, and it is revealed that Humpty Dumpty never died, as he was just in a goose costume. The main positive that I credit this film to is that there's a lot of depth and context to it. I was shocked with how complex Puss and Humpty's interactions and relationship was, and even the banter between Kitty and Puss too, which really made this film easy to invest into and to follow, since you care about all of their journeys and it combines together really well. Because there are so few people in the film, it means that all of them get the perfect amount of focus and depth, which again reminds me of early DreamWorks. As a geography and history person, I always like the extra details paid attention to the cultural aspects of a film. In this film, reeks of it in a brilliant manner. You can tell that they put a lot of effort into Spanish and Mexican landscaping, culture, and it really enriched the film for me. You need a great setting that helps elevate the characters and the plot for everything to gel together in cohesion, and that is exactly what this setting did. From the spiciness of Kitty and Puss to the sad impoverishment that the orphans had to deal with, but also the strong sense of community too. Over the films, I have severely critiqued the humor of DreamWorks animation for several reasons: crappy toilet humor, poor execution, very little wit, over-reliance on pop culture, so on and so forth. A lot of the humor in this film was borderline adult, like the other DreamWorks films, and was more reliant on the wit of the dialogue and how the voice actors played off of one another. Even for the children, the slapstick humor was a lot better, and I was shocked with how much I ended up laughing throughout the film, which almost never happens with DreamWorks films. Regarding the cons, I don't have many, but the few that I do have are pretty large. The main flaw I have with this film in itself is the pacing of the movie. I mentioned previously that the first act is extremely long, and I know why they did it. We needed some history on the characters, and seeing Puss and Humpty's interactions from the beginning to their current state was great, but it did went on for like over 5 to 10 minutes. It really dragged the film out and made the first act end in the midpoint of the film. A lot of the pacing could have went towards the second and third acts, since in comparison they came off as a bit short. Another gripe that I have is what generally tends to happen whenever prequels are made. When we are introduced to Puss in Boots in Shrek 2, he was an infamous mass murderer as he was hired by King Carol to put a hit on Shrek. In this film, Puss is a misunderstood anti-hero as he was set up to look like a robber by Humpty, who ended up tricking him, and all he wants to do is repair his reputation. Seeing the gap from him being seen as hero in this movie to the mass murderer in Shrek 2 just leaves me with a bit more questions, and it's why people should really touch on prequels or spin-offs from a narrative point of view.
When the film was released in October of 2011, it made $150 million domestically and $405 million in other territories, adding up to a worldwide amount of $555 million. It was the third highest-grossing animated film of the year, behind Kung Fu Panda 2 and Cars 2. Despite this, it was the second lowest-grossing Shrek film, only making more than the first film. Critically, it was pretty well received. A lot of people praised the charm, wit, visual effects, choreography, and humor, as well as people stating that it stands on its own outside of the Shrek franchise. There were a few critiques, which were about how some felt that Puss's playboy humor got old very fast now that he was the protagonist, and the story wasn't deep, groundbreaking, or doing anything new enough for a lot of the audience and critics. Shockingly, it received quite a lot of nominations, despite a good amount being from the Annies, and some from the smaller awards too. It didn't really win many awards either. My concluding thoughts are that the film was one of DreamWorks' stronger additions and focused on the context within the film to sell it, instead of a bunch of pop culture gimmicks and trends. It didn't even rely on the fact that it is technically a part of the Shrek franchise, and it's easy to even forget that it's technically a Shrek film. It embraced the fairy tale aspect and the Spanish elements to create this brilliant combination between the two. It was successful enough, and there was a sequel planned, but since the reshuffling that will take place in a few years at this point, it has since been removed and is in production hell. Despite relying on sequels and spin-offs, 2011 was one of DreamWorks Animation's strongest years to date. The main difference between the two 2011 films and other years that had sequels and or spin-offs was that for these two films, they took what worked in those films, tweaked it, and added a bunch of things that were new to create this perfect combination and uniqueness within these two movies that also translated well as an overall franchise. In conclusion, Puss in Boots is not the most unique or in-depth film, but it removed all of the clutter and focused on the few things that really worked in the franchise and in other films, creating the less is more dichotomy, which worked brilliantly with this film, and it reminds me of the pioneer films. In this aspect, Puss in Boots is kind of like a throwback, because it focused more on the culture and the setting of the films, and utilized less characters and focused more on the interactions. Things were going very well up until this point, but things would soon go downhill in 2012, and as of 2018, things will not get any better.